All right. So this is typically how the labs are going to be set up. I'm going to be asking you to program or configure the E5AK. So for the first two labs, we're going to be using a J2 thermocouple. So a J2 thermocouple. Do you remember what page I had told you to go to find out what number this corresponds to? There were two pages, two main pages that I told you to remember, one of which is page 531. Page 531 was for your alarm types. Or is that wrong? Which was which? And there was 310.
531 is for the input types.
So page 531. 5-31 is for the input types. 310 is for the alarm types. So remember this. Okay, if you go to page 531, look for a J2, and it'll tell you what you have to input in what exactly. How do you program this? How do you tell the E5AKT that you're using a J2 thermocouple?
You go to setup,
number
input
5
type.
or something.
Okay, hold on. I'm going to go to setup. Once you go to setup, which is your mode, the first parameter that's going to be available is input type, which is going to look something like this. Input type. Okay. And in input type, what do you put? What do you program it for? If it's a J2. Well, if you go to page 531, what does it tell you?
It's gonna be number 5.
It's going to be number 5. Okay, so that's the first thing. Okay, I'm not saying that. If you remember when we did the drive, I gave you like basically a page like this, and you just basically use it to brainstorm and write things down, kind of like a draft. And then afterwards, you're going to take all this information and put it in a table in a structured way so you can program it without forgetting anything. So that's what we're going to do here. We've taken care of J2. Now we're going to move on. This is not in the order that you're going to program them, but just basically the order or the way you're going to program them, what mode you have to go to, and which parameter. So I'm just going to change color here so that nothing gets jumbled up a little bit. If we look at the second one, what am I asking for here, and where do I go? This is on-off setting. On-off setting. Where do I have to go to control using on-off? Kind of give you a bit of a
Expansion.
there. You have to go to expansion mode. Guys, use the index that I gave you.
Yeah, honestly,
Expansion.
that's what I'm using.
Yeah, I mean, it's fast when you use that. It's right, everything's right in front of you. So you go to expansion. I'm going to underline the actual mode. Okay, and then from there, you want to go all the way down to control. And then in control, what do you program it for? On off. What's the other choice? There's only two. There's on off and there's PID. So PID is proportional control, but here I'm telling you I want on off. So you're going to use on off. I'm running out of a bit of real estate here, but you get the idea. And the next thing is units used for temperature in degrees Celsius. So I want to use degrees Celsius. What do I have to do here? What mode do I go to? And what parameter?
Setup and DU.
Setup and DU. So the actual value in the parameter, I'm just going to put it in a kind of like I did here, a square or a rectangle. Let's go back here. So you said setup?
Yeah.
So setup mode. So the mode, I'm going to underline the parameter. It's DU is what you'll see, which stands for degree units. So it's going to look like this. Yeah. It's a 7-segment display, so it's going to be segments like that. And what do you choose? You choose degrees Celsius. You basically remember you have arrow keys going up and down. There are two choices, Fahrenheit or Celsius. So you choose Celsius. Anyone having difficulties catching up so far? Are we getting this? Any questions?
We have a index for the exam because there's no chance I remember all this.
You have the manual, yes.
Okay.
I mean, with the index you gave us, it's pretty simple to follow. It's just not having it is the thing, you know.
Yeah, don't worry about that. You're gonna have it. Number of steps. What about number of steps?
Sorry, just a quick question.
Go ahead.
What's after setup? I can't see what you wrote with the dotted lines, the code.
What's after setup?
No,
Oh, yeah. I think it
for
means the DU.
yeah, DU.
Yeah, it's
This
DU.
is DU, degree of
Celsius.
units. And then here, so this is the parameter which is found under setup mode. And then in the square, this is what you program it for, or to. It's degrees Celsius. We're good? So number of steps per pattern, 4. Where do we go for this?
Program.
You go to program mode.
And it's like SNO, something like that.
Yeah. So in program mode, that's where you basically have to go to a specific pattern and it asks you number of steps. One of the first things it asks you. So what was the abbreviation again? NO,
Sorry?
you said then? What did you say the abbreviation?
S-NO with a bar on top.
SNO.
No,
So what does this mean? It's something like this. Just what I want you to write down for yourself is number of steps, which basically it says right here. Okay, number of steps. And what are we programming it for? Well, 4. You go to 4. What does that mean if you program 4 for number of steps? It means that it's going to ask you for 4 set points, which are basically, you know, the set points that you want, the 4 temperatures, and then following you inputting the actual set point, it asks you for the time. So how much time, in minutes or in seconds? The next step here is alarms. Now this is the slightly more complicated part. The alarms, it's actually this step here, and this step here together. Okay. What I want to do before we talk about alarms, let me get rid of this output here. Let's do the output, step number 5. So what do we do for the outputs? First of all, what mode are they in? Setup, expansion.
They're in setup, I believe.
They're in multiple ones, though. I don't get
No,
it.
no, they're in setup. It's in setup. And in setup, we're going to go to output 1. Output 1 is the parameter here. And then what you program is heat. So in output 1, using the up-down arrow keys, you're going to choose heat, not alarm, not cool, but heat. That's what you're programming. You're not typing this in. Remember, you have arrow keys. You go up, you go down, and you select whichever one you want. You're going to see heat as you increase, decrease with the up-down arrow keys, heat, cool. So you stop at heat. Okay, so now we have the alarms. There are 3 things you have to do for the alarms. The first step for the alarms is that you have to associate an alarm with an output, which is basically step number 1 right here. This is step number 2, and this is step number 3 for the alarms. Okay. 2 and 3 could be interchanged, but step 1 has to be done first. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and come down to here. Okay, so everything for the alarms are done in one cluster here. So we're using sub 1 and sub 2. It means that we have 2 alarms. So where do we go for sub 1 and sub 2? Which parameter? Sorry, not what parameter, but which mode do we go to?
It's also going to be set up.
It's going to be in setup. In setup mode, we're going to go to sub 1, followed by sub 2. Okay. And now we're going to associate alarms. So let's just say that we have 2 alarms here. It's not telling us in this lab here which alarm to use, okay? But what I'm going to shake things up a little bit because I want you to understand how the alarms are linked throughout these 3 steps. So here we're going to say that we're going to go with alarm 3. So sub 1 is alarm 3, okay? Sub 2 is alarm 1. So we're not using alarm 2. We can use any alarms we want. These are the alarms that we're using. We're using alarm 3. So when alarm 3 is triggered, sub 1 is triggered. The contact closes, a light comes on, or a siren, whatever is needed. When alarm 1 is triggered, it triggers sub 2.
Sir,
Yes.
sub 1 and sub 2, fine. Where did you get alarm 3 from? I didn't see it mention anything about a third alarm.
We have 3 alarms.
Okay.
So we have alarm 1, alarm 2, alarm 3. I'm choosing these 2 randomly.
Okay.
Sub 1 does not have to be linked to alarm 1 just because it's a 1. Okay.
Okay.
So I'm
No.
just saying that we can choose any alarms we want.
Okay.
And the reason I'm kind of mixing it up like this is to make you understand that when we choose alarm types and alarm values, the numbers have to match. Okay. So our next step here we have something called high width differential, which is basically an upper deviation. Here we have a lower deviation. Now there were 5 alarm types we discussed. Upper lower deviation, that was selection 1. Here we have an upper deviation. So where do we program the alarm types? Is it in program or is it in setup?
Setup.
In setup. So these guys here basically also in setup mode, we're going to go to what you'll see as ALT on the 7 segment display. So since we have 2, I'll write them twice. And now what we have to do, see how we have alarm type 3 here, or alarm 3 and alarm 1, and we're not using alarm 2? Well, this sub 1 is alarm 3. It's going to be linked to alarm type 3. Sub 2 is linked to alarm 1. It's going to be linked to alarm type 1. Okay, so we're going to go to alarm 3. Okay, these are the parameters. And we're going to program it to what is the equivalent of an upper deviation. First of all, what page is this on? Remember those 2 pages I told you about? Page number?
310.
310. Okay, page 310. So if we go to page 310 and we want an upper deviation, is that number 1, 2, or 3? Number 1, if you remember, was upper and lower. We don't want an upper and lower.
We want
Actually,
2, right?
we do want an upper and a lower, but not together, because if you look down here, they're going to be separate values. Okay, if they're the same values, you can use 1, but we don't. So yeah, you're right. It's number 2, Luca. Number 2 is your upper. Followed by which one is your lower?
So how do you know it's number 2 and not number 4?
Well, if you look at your alarm types on page 310, number 1 was upper and lower. Ellie? Number
Yeah.
1 was upper and lower. Number 2 was just an upper. Number 3 is a lower. Okay, it's on page 310. Then there was 8 as well, but that was an absolute. It's not relevant in this case here. So look, again, I'm going to recap. You have 3 steps. Okay? Here, you want to associate your alarms with a given output. Why? Because you basically want to turn on a light. You have to activate an output. Here, I'm telling you what the alarm types are. So how do we program alarm types? In setup, you go to alarm type 3, which is linked to alarm 3, which triggers sub 1. And we're choosing upper. Why? Because that's what I'm asking for. Next is lower. Lower is represented by a 3. Where do I get that information? Page 310. The only thing left to do is, yes, I have an upper and a lower, but I haven't given any information as to what the degrees are. So here, these 2 steps here, I have to program values. Do you remember what mode the values were in? What mode? Was it still in setup?
No, it's in program.
It's in program. So it's actually after you've programmed your set points and times and repeats, it's going to ask you for the alarm values. So let's see if you've understood the connection here. Where do I program these alarm values? Here, high of not more and low of not more are linked to high, upper deviation, and low, lower deviation. So what do I program? Do I go to alarm 1, 2, or 3?
So 1 and 3.
Yeah.
1 and 3. So let me keep it in order. I'm going to go to alarm 3 and alarm 2. So what do I program in each of these? What do I program alarm 3 for?
Isn't it alarm 3 and alarm 1?
Yes, I even said 1 and I wrote 2 for some reason.
Well, you could. We're gonna have 2. What do we write on 2 if we're not using it? 0.
No, you're not. If you're not associating out alarm 2 with any output, it's not going to be available. We're not using it. We have 3 alarms. You can use any 3. Here we're using alarm 1 and alarm 3. So alarm 3, we're going to program it for 4. Why 4? Well, 4 degrees. I'm just going to put a degree sign here because you're not going to actually see it on the screen. Okay, just so you know what this 4 represents. It represents 4 degrees. That's your, remember, this is a value in degrees, but it's associated with this alarm type, which is upper. So an upper deviation of 4 degrees. And now I have a lower deviation of 2 degrees. So alarm 1 linked to alarm type 1, linked to alarm 1 and sub 2. Okay, so there's a lot of associations there. So how do you trigger sub 2? Sub 2, the contact will close if alarm 1 is triggered. How is alarm 1 triggered? Well, I have an alarm type with a lower deviation of 2 degrees. Let me color code this for you to make it a little bit easier. This alarm 1 is linked to, I'll just rewrite this in black rather than highlight it. So sub 2, alarm 1 is linked to alarm type 1. And alarm type 1 is programmed to a lower deviation. How do I know it's lower deviation? Because it's programmed for 3. And then a lower deviation of how much? Of 2 degrees. And that's programmed in alarm value 1. Okay. So this is what you're going to have to program. Okay. And that's how basically it's going to work. So wherever I have in black here works together. Whatever I left in red there works together to trigger 2 alarms on sub 1 and sub 2.
Sir,
Yes.
so for labs, just to be clear, this is what we're getting, and then we're gonna have to create the parameter diagram. We're gonna have to translate it, the parameters.
Well, you're not translating. What you're doing is taking the information on this page and you're going to be writing it out here. So you see here, you see program alarm values.
Yeah.
So what you're going to be doing is you're going to be highlighting all this, and you're going to put the value. Alarm value 1, well, 2 degrees.
Okay.
Three.
All right.
It's going to be pretty straightforward. This is basically your brainstorming page. So dot your I's, cross your T's, make sure that you've got everything covered, okay? So again, this is only your lab intro. So yes, there's a lot of information here, but it's all linked to what we did last week, or last few classes.
Sir, can I ask another question?
Yep. Go ahead.
Why is it that alarm 3 is programmed for 4 degrees and why is it that alarm 3 is the higher deviation?
I just made it so. You
Oh,
could have
okay.
you could have chosen anything. I
Like
just-
during like on the next lab, let's say, would it say which alarm would be the higher deviation, or it's just something we're supposed to get?
as we progress, I'm going to give you more specific kind of instructions. But
Okay.
for this one here, which is basically you decide. But I also am taking the opportunity to also associate or make the associations between the fact that alarm 3, alarm type 3, and alarm value 3, 333, they all have to match. They work together.
Okay.
So what about time units? Where do I find
Expansion.
expansion? So I'm just going to abbreviate EXP, underline, because this is the mode. And then you're going to see a TU, which is time units. And you're going to program it for minutes and seconds. Okay. So in order to do these labs, you can't use hours and minutes. It'll take forever to check the lab. So we're going to choose minutes and seconds all the time. And all that means is that if you put a T0 of 20, it'll be 20 seconds because it's seconds here. If you would choose hours, minutes, and you put 20, it'll be 20 minutes. So this is pretty much the bulk of it, okay? So if everyone's finished this page here, we're going to move on to the next page. And on this page here, let's see how much you remember from the.
For half a second.
Say again, please. Oh, yeah, you need a bit more time.
Yeah, like just like that's it. That's it.
Yeah. So for those of you that are done, go to the next page, and we'll see if you remember how to hook this up. All you're hooking up here is heat. Don't worry about wiring up or showing the sub 1, sub 2. That'll just be programming. It's already pre-wired for you. Are we good? Anyone need a bit more time?
Good. We Gucci.
All right, so here we have output 1. And what other information we have? Output 1, what kind of control do we have? On, off, or proportional?
On, off.
On, off. And why is that important? Because it tells us
Type of
which
relay
one
we're
it is.
using.
Right, exactly. Which one is on, off?
SSR, no?
Right, so we're not using the proportional relay here. We're not using this, okay? So the only thing you have to wire here is what?
7
Well,
and 8.
first of all, your 8, if you remember, was 24 volts in, right? So between 7 and 8 here, you actually have a contact, okay? You don't have to draw that in, but so 24 volts into 8. Where is 7 going? This
To
wire
7.
here. It's going to 7. Remember, this is the wire that potentially can go to 8 as well, but 8 is going to your fan for cooling. Where does 7 go? 7 is
the
going to go
SSR.
to,
SSR.
right, to give a signal to the SSR, to A1. There's a line, 120 volt line, going into the SSR, and then the output is going to pin 4. Okay, I'm just going to draw a line actually from the output of the proportional relay, which we're not going to use, but that's going to 3, just so you understand what's going on with the wire going to your light bulb. Okay.
Oh, wait, so why pin 4 again for the SSR?
Well, that's just the way it's wired.
Oh, it's just the way it is? Okay.
Yeah, that's the way it's pre-wired. So it's either the output of the proportional relay going to 3 or the output of the SSR going to 4. Again, I'm just drawing the 3, which is not necessary, but I'm drawing so you know that the light bulb here, which is the heat source, this 120 volt supply, kind of overshot there. Is it going to 3 or is it going to 4?
To 4, right? Is it 4?
Is it 4, sir?
Yeah,
Yes,
it is 4.
Right? Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Sir, could you rotate it? It's kind of weird.